The Galactic Biology Symposium was the kind of event humans usually weren't invited to, not because they lacked knowledge, but because, quite frankly, they had a reputation for being a bit reckless with science. But that didn't stop Dr. Theo Marsh. He was the first human ever granted a research booth at the prestigious starport on Elesis for a floating city orbiting a lavender gas giant. Theo, a lanky biochemist from Earth with sleep-deprived eyes and a borderline obsessive love for cellular regeneration, didn't exactly blend in. Surrounded by creatures that glowed, slithered, or hovered, he stood at his tiny booth labeled Human Hormonal Acceleration in Cross-Species Application. Most attendees walked right past. That is, until she showed up. Zaraka was tall, like really tall, easily 7 feet of sleek, amethyst-colored skin, with eyes that shimmered like twin moons and hair that floated slightly, like it couldn't decide whether to obey gravity. She was from the Calixian race, known for their warrior class, tactical genius, and modest, almost flat-chested frames. She was curious about Earth's unique approach to genetic enhancement. You claim hormonal modulation can enhance cellular growth in targeted areas? She asked, leaning over Theo's desk, her expression skeptical. Theo, trying not to stare at the strange bioluminescent lines running across her collarbone, nodded. In theory, yes. We've used it for medical reconstruction, organ regeneration, and, cosmetic reshaping. Cosmetic? She repeated, confused. He hesitated, then added awkwardly, like, enlarging certain body parts, voluntarily, for, aesthetic preference. Zaraka blinked, then nodded slowly. Like battle claws or strengthened dermal layers? Sure, let's go with that. Whether it was curiosity or a dare from her squad mates, Zaraka signed up for a quick demo, not knowing that Theo had accidentally switched the test compound with a more potent version meant for controlled human trials. It was meant to stimulate growth in minor tissues, like earlobes or muscle fibers. But on a Calixian female? Yeah, it really worked. Within minutes, Zaraka clutched her chest and stared down in horror. The normally subtle curvature of her upper torso had swelled into, well, let's just say the word coconuts was an exaggeration. Even her armored suit began to creak under the sudden pressure. Theo stared, mouth hanging open like a fool. Oh no. Oh, no. I didn't think it would. That dosage wasn't calibrated for Calixian. Zaraka's face turned a deep violet, the Calixian version of a furious blush. Her voice came out tight and high. What did you do to me? From across the symposium floor, people began to stare. Not because of the scene, but because Zaraka, the famously cold and intimidating warrior elite, was now standing with what looked like 2 beach balls stuffed into her exosuit, and she was blushing like a schoolgirl caught with a crush. I swear, Theo said, hands raised, it was an accident. I can reverse it, I think. Maybe. Just don't kill me. She glared at him, flustered, and unsure whether to vaporize him on the spot or hide in a closet. You enlarge my mammary nodes. In front of the entire Galactic Sciences Council. Technically, it was a voluntary trial, he squeaked. That was how a hormonal enhancement booth became the most visited exhibit of the symposium, and how Dr. Theo Marsh became both the most infamous and sought-after human scientist in galactic history, the man who made an elite alien warrior's coconuts go viral across the stars. But for Zaraka, this was only the beginning of her very human problem. Zaraka refused to leave the symposium floor for nearly an hour, not because she was enjoying the attention, but because she couldn't figure out how to walk without looking like a malfunctioning hoverbot. Every time she shifted her weight, her newly enhanced assets bounced just enough to throw her balance off. Her armor was groaning at the seams, and every stare made her blush deeper. Stop looking at me, she hissed at Theo, her arms awkwardly folded over her chest, as if that would make them shrink back to normal. I'm trying not to, he whispered, staring resolutely at the floor. But the physics are fascinating. She snapped her head toward him, her eyes practically sparking. I swear on the moons of Calyx. One more comet, and I'll shove you in a cryopod and jettison you into a sun. Right. Sorry. No comments. Zip. Nothing, he muttered, resisting the urge to pull out his datapad and take notes. A hush fell over the crowd as the high chair of the symposium, a floating, Crystalline, being named Varel, drifted toward the booth. Its voice rang out like wind chimes. Dr. Marsh, would you please explain the nature of this enhancement and why a decorated Calixian warrior now resembles an Earthian pinup model? Zaraka groaned audibly. Theo cleared his throat, fumbling to explain. It's a hormonal growth stimulant. Accelerates tissue expansion based on receptor density. I may have underestimated the Calixian mammary gland's response threshold. You think? Zaraka snapped. Varel's glowing form pulsed thoughtfully. Fascinating, and entirely unintended. Yes, absolutely. Totally accidental. No pervy intent whatsoever, Theo insisted. Hands up again like the universal sign of innocent human panic. Varel tilted slightly. Then why is your booth labeled optional aesthetic enhancements? Theo froze. It was a translation error? A few people in the crowd laughed. Zaraka looked like she wanted to crawl into a black hole. But then something unexpected happened. A long, serpentine alien, a Zealothi diplomat, slithered up with interest. Does this enhancement work on other species? He asked. Theo blinked. You want to try it? I've always been curious about Earth's obsession with curves, the Zealothi mused. That's when the shift began. Suddenly, people weren't mocking Theo. They were lining up. Alien females, males, even some gelatinous beings with no visible anatomy, all queued around his booth, waving credit chips and whispering excitedly. Zaraka stood to the side, arms crossed tightly. Unbelievable, she muttered. I came here for tactical innovation, and now I'm some kind of intergalactic advertisement. Theo leaned over. Hey, you're pioneering cross-species beauty standards. You're a galactic icon now. Don't make me crush you. He grinned nervously. Would it help if I said I could reverse the effect now? I recalibrated the compound. She hesitated. Then, oddly, her blush deepened. No. I don't trust you not to mess it up worse. And besides, she glanced down, then quickly away. My squad mates, they keep staring. Theo blinked. In a bad way? She looked like she hated herself for even responding. No, in a weirdly impressed way. Well, Theo said with a smirk, congratulations. You've accidentally started an alien body positivity movement. Zaraka groaned. If my mother sees this, she'll exile me. But the real problem wasn't her mother, because 2 booths over, a delegation of Calixian male warriors were watching, and one of them, broad-shouldered, high-ranked, and definitely not amused, locked eyes with Theo, then turned to whisper something to his comrades. Zaraka saw it too. Oh, she said. What? Theo asked. She looked at him, expression unreadable. You might have just made me the most desired female on my planet. That sounds like a compliment? No, Theo. That means I'm now the target of 3 marriage contracts, 2 political rivalries, and a blood duel challenge. Theo paled. Oh. She cracked her knuckles slowly. You're coming back to Calyx with me. To fix this. The transport to Calyx Prime was tense. Zaraka hadn't said a word since they left Elysis 4. She just sat in the seat beside Theo, arms crossed tightly over her chest, which, thanks to the enhancement, had made her personal space bubble roughly double its original size. Theo was doing everything in his power not to accidentally brush against her. That included sitting like a statue, breathing quietly, and thinking intensely about algebra equations. So, he said after 2 hours of painful silence, just for clarity's sake, am I being taken to Calyx for scientific consultation or punishment? Zaraka's violet eyes flicked toward him. Both. Cool, he said, his voice cracking slightly. And, blood duels. You mentioned those earlier. That's like metaphorical, right? She didn't answer. Oh, God, he whispered, pulling his knees in tighter. When the transport ship landed on Calyx Prime's capital plateau, Theo was almost blinded by the brightness of the triple suns. The atmosphere shimmered with heat, and the air buzzed with energy, and not the good kind. Hundreds of warriors stood in rows, gleaming armor reflecting the light, their expressions stern. And in the middle of them, a massive, dark-scale Calixian male stepped forward. His armor bore the mark of the High Warlord's bloodline. "That's General Vurax," Zaraka muttered. "My former commander, and apparently one of the suitors." Vurax's eyes locked on Theo. "Is that the human?" Theo smiled weakly. "Hi. Big fan of your planet. Very scenic." The general stepped closer, towering over him. "You tamper with the purity of a Calixian warrior, altered her sacred form, turned her into some soft curved showpiece." Zaraka bristled. "I volunteered." He didn't force. "It doesn't matter," Vurax snapped. "You bear responsibility. And by Calixian law, you must now enter the trial of claim." Theo blinked. "Wait, trial of what now?" 3 males seek her hand. 3 challenges. If you survive all 3, you win her." Theo sputtered. "Win her? She's not a raffle prize. What century is this?" "It is our tradition," Vurax growled. "And if I lose, you die." Theo turned to Zaraka. "You're okay with this?" She shrugged, slightly smug. "You made me the most wanted female in 10 sectors. This is your mess." He stared at her, slack-jawed. "I gave you space boobs, not a royal engagement." A moment later, he was being dragged off to the arena grounds, where the first challenge awaited. The Calixian crowd roared from high stone seats. The challenge field was a long, elevated path above a pool of glowing sludge. On the other side, a massive, tusked beast waited, flanked by 2 other suitors. The first was a lizard-faced brute with bone piercings. The second, a sleek strategist type with cold, calculating eyes. Theo stood at the starting line in borrowed armor that didn't quite fit, mostly because the chest plate was designed for someone with far more muscle and way less anxiety. Vurax stepped forward and shouted, "First challenge, the path of pain. Cross it without falling. Face the beast. Win the favor." Zaraka stood off to the side, arms crossed again, partly in judgment, partly because bouncing had become a daily embarrassment. Theo took a deep breath. "Okay, I'm a scientist. I've seen alien crocs. I played Human Torture Gauntlet VR. How bad could this be?" Answer, very bad. The bridge flexed under his feet, oozing some kind of sticky plasma. Each step burned slightly. From above, flying drones dropped what looked like shocknet mines. One clipped his arm and sent 10,000 volts down his spine. He screamed like a banshee and stumbled, barely catching the edge before he could fall into the sludge below. The crowd laughed. Theo hauled himself back up, his hair smoking, muttering every curse word in 5 languages. He kept going, step after painful step. By the time he reached the tusked beast, his armor was half melted, and he smelled like fried chicken. The beast snarled and charged. Theo did the only thing he could: screamed, jumped, and threw a vial of leftover enhancement serum into its mouth. The beast froze. Then suddenly it perked up, its muscles bulged, its chest puffed, and, to the horror of the handlers, it began strutting around like it was on an intergalactic catwalk. The crowd gasped. Vurax frowned. Zaraka actually smiled. Theo stumbled past the confused beast and collapsed on the victory platform, face down, moaning, "Did I win?" Zaraka walked over and crouched next to him. 1 challenge down, 2 to go. He groaned. "Please tell me the next one involves sitting quietly and drinking tea." She chuckled. "No, Theo. Next is combat of the mind." He whimpered. The combat of the mind sounded like something out of a cheap sci-fi novel, until Theo was escorted into a towering obsidian chamber, with glowing veins of blue energy running through the walls. At the center of the room hovered a sphere, pulsing, humming, and probably way smarter than him. "Step into the link," the Calixian attendant instructed. Theo glanced back towards Zaraka, who stood behind a pane of psychic shielded with her arms folded and that now signature look, half amused, half annoyed. She gave him a single nod. He sighed. "Great. I almost died on a lava bridge, and now I'm playing brain chicken with a glowing space orb." He stepped in. The moment his feet hit the circular pad, the sphere lit up and his mind stretched. Not physically, but in that weird out-of-body way, like dreaming inside a dream. Reality blurred, then snapped into focus. But it wasn't his focus. He stood in a field, a familiar one. Wait! This is my backyard. Earth, Texas, 2097. The air smelled like fried oil and hover truck exhaust. There was a distant barking, the annoying screech of neighbor's fence bot, and in front of him, a younger version of himself, skinny, scared, barely a teen, being cornered by 3 bigger kids. Not real, Theo muttered. This isn't real. But the pain was. When the bigger kid shoved his younger self, Theo felt it. Sharp, humiliating pain. Then the Calixian voice echoed all around him. Confront your deepest weakness. Only then will the mind prove worthy. Theo stared at the scene. At the moment he never really faced. Not even in therapy. He'd been scrawny, a bookworm, always chosen last. But it wasn't just the bullying. It was the fear. The way he froze when he should have stood up. The way he ran. Fight back, he whispered to the boy. Say something. But the boy didn't. He took the punches, then curled up and waited for it to end. Just like before. The scene reset. Same bullies. Same moment. Looping. Again. And again. Theo's hands trembled. This isn't fair. I'm not a fighter. The Calixian voice returned. Then you will never deserve her. The words stung more than the punches. Zaraka. He didn't even know why she mattered so much. She was dangerous, impatient, barely tolerated him. And yet, the thought of her looking disappointed, it hurt more than the damn lightning bridge. So he stepped forward. He walked into the scene, merged with the boy, became him. And this time, when the punch came, he didn't duck. He blocked. It hurt, but he stayed standing. I'm not running, Theo muttered through gritted teeth. Not this time. The bullies faded. The field melted away. And suddenly, he was back in the obsidian chamber, on his knees, panting, drenched in cold sweat. The psychic orb slowly dimmed, pulsing once with a soft chime. A voice boomed across the chamber. Challenge 2 passed. From the other side of the barrier, Zaraka tilted her head. She didn't smile, but her lips twitched just slightly. And for her, that was basically a standing ovation. Theo stumbled out, barely upright. Didn't even bleed this time. He joked weakly, eyes unfocused. She helped steady him, one hand on his arm. You went into your own trauma vortex and didn't scream like a toddler. That's progress. He blinked up at her. You care. I don't want my accidental fiancé to embarrass me on a galactic stage, she said flatly. He grinned. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. She rolled her eyes and turned away quickly, but not before he saw that violet flush creeping up her cheeks again. Then came the announcement. Final challenge. Duel of honor. No weapons. No aid. Hand-to-hand combat against General Vurax. Theo's jaw dropped. Zaraka froze. And Vurax, standing atop the grandstone arena, cracked his neck and smirked. I'm so dead, Theo whispered. Zaraka stepped in front of him, her voice low and urgent. Listen, Vurax won't hold back. He wants me, and he's going to treat you like a weak human joke. Well, he's not wrong. But if you survive, if you last, even 5 minutes, Calixian law says you earn the right to refuse any suitor challenge, including him. Theo blinked. So, I just have to not die. Exactly. Fantastic. That's my specialty. She looked him over, skinny, bruised, shaking, and did something surprising. She touched his face, gently. Don't give him the satisfaction. You've come this far, Theo. His heart stumbled. Zaraka, don't make this weird, she muttered, snatching her hand back. But her blush was now glowing like a nova. Theo squared his shoulders. It was time to face the final challenge. The grand arena of Calyx Prime was nothing short of terrifying. Jagged obsidian walls soared into the sky, casting long shadows over a blood-colored sandpit where champions had fought and died for centuries. Statues of past warriors, locked in eternal poses of brutal victory, lined the perimeter. And at the center, General Vurax waited. He wasn't wearing armor. He didn't need it. The man was built like a battleship made of muscle and malice. His forearms looked like they could snap boulders. His chest rippled under a sleeveless combat vest, and his face, expressionless, jaw clenched, made Theo feel like a bug under a microscope. Theo, on the other hand, looked like someone just dragged him off a lab couch, slapped a padded tunic on him, and said, "Good luck, nerd." The crowd roared as the gong rang. Trial of honor begins. Theo took one step into the ring and immediately started sweating. Vurax cracked his knuckles and began circling like a predator. Every movement was calculated, lethal, confident. Theo whispered to himself, "Just 5 minutes. That's all. Just dance around and don't die." He threw a nervous smile at Vurax. "Look, we don't have to do this. I can just back out and—" Vurax lunged. Theo barely dodged, stumbling backward, rolling across the sand as Vurax's fist slammed in the ground where he'd just been standing, leaving a dent the size of a dinner plate. "Oh my God!" Theo gasped. "He's not even trying yet." From the stands, Zaraka stood watching, arms folded, but her face was tight, concerned. Vurax came again, this time sweeping a leg. Theo jumped. Barely. His foot clipped the ground, and he tumbled again, landing hard on his side. Pain exploded through his ribs. The crowd booed. Theo coughed, dust in his throat. "You're losing. You're pathetic. You don't belong here." The old voices in his head were back. Echoes of school bullies, doubting professors, even his own father, all telling him he was just a small-brained earthling who'd never be good for anything but test tubes and tissue samples. He looked up to see Vurax charging again. "Nope," he shouted, rolling out of the way just in time. That's when something shifted, because Theo realized something important. He wasn't going to win this, but he could be annoying. And nothing makes a power-hungry warrior more furious than someone they can't catch. So Theo scrambled his feet and began circling, bobbing and weaving like a confused octopus on espresso. Vurax growled, "Fight me? No thanks." Theo shouted, ducking under a punch and darting left. The crowd started laughing. Zaraka's eyes widened. This wasn't cowardice. This was strategy. Vurax came harder now, swinging, snarling, lunging, and Theo just kept dodging. Sometimes barely, sometimes by sheer luck, but always just out of reach. "Come on," Theo shouted back. "What's the matter? Too slow for a weak little human?" Vurax bellowed in charge again, but this time, Theo tripped on purpose. He hit the ground hard and skidded, but Vurax overshot, crashing into one of the arena pillars with a loud crack. The crowd gasped. Theo stood slowly, clutching his ribs, panting. That wasn't supposed to work. He glanced toward the stand. Zaraka wasn't just watching anymore. She was smiling, proud. Theo felt something tighten in his chest. And then the gong rang. Time. The human has survived. The arena fell into stunned silence. General Vurax stood up, fists clenched, humiliated. But law was law. Theo had lasted the full time. No weapons, no help, and by ancient right, he'd now earned the right to deny all challenges and keep his bond. Zaraka walked down slowly, her long legs kicking up sand as she approached him. Theo blinked up at her. "Hey, did I look cool?" "You looked like a terrified squirrel on roller skates," she said flatly, then added, "But you survived. That's better." He laughed, winced, and hissed, "Ow!" Ribs, possibly broken. She knelt beside him and offered a hand. "Let's go, accidental fiancé." He took her hand. The crowd erupted into wild cheers, not just for him, but for them, a human scientist and a Calixian warrior, bonded by accident, but maybe something more. And high above, in a private balcony, several political leaders began whispering plans. Because if a human could survive Calixian trials, perhaps humanity was ready for more than just observation. By the time Theo could walk again, and that was a very generous word for what his body was doing, he was being escorted into the high matriarchal hall of Calyx Prime. Zaraka walked beside him, her usual stride bold and unbothered, while Theo limped like a man who'd been chewed up by a sandstorm and then politely spit out for round 2. His tunic was torn, his ribs still throbbed, and he was pretty sure he'd left half a lung back in the arena. But the worst part? Everyone was treating him like royalty. Guards bowed. Attendants offered nutrient tonics and strange energy massages. One particularly bold Calixian elder even reached out and touched his hair, declaring it soft, like pre-battle moss. Zaraka was trying so hard not to laugh. It looked like her face might crack. "I hate this," Theo muttered, swatting another bowl of glowing soup away. "You survived the trials," she said. "You're now considered an honorary Calixian warrior, and my bonded partner. Don't say that like it's casual." "It's not," she agreed. "It's binding, ancient, sacred, and now, thanks to you, politically explosive." Theo blinked. "Come again." She sighed. "General Vurax is part of the ruling bloodline. He wanted to merge houses with me through a ceremonial bond. It would have given his faction control over my unit and battle tech. And now I'm bonded to a human scientist who tripped on his own foot and dodged death by accident." "Thanks," he muttered. "Nice to know I'm ruining intergalactic politics with style." They reached the ceremonial chamber. High ceilings, violet crystals jetting from the walls, and a long, stone table shaped like a blade. At the far end stood 3 figures in layered robes. The Triad of Calyx, their ruling council. One of them, the tallest, spoke. "Zaraka, Theo Marsh, you stand before the council, bonded by trial, witnessed by thousands. Do you confirm this union?" Theo's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Zaraka answered first. "Confirmed." He looked at her in disbelief. "You didn't even pause." She shrugged. "It's done. You passed. You didn't die. That's more than I expected." Theo turned back to the council, cleared his throat, and said, "Look, I wasn't trying to bond with anyone. This was all an accident. A hormone accident. I literally just wanted to show off a tissue enhancer. I didn't mean to start a war or get married or invent interstellar boob jobs." The room was silent. One of the council members leaned forward. "And yet, here you are. You have proven resilience, intelligence, instinct for survival. You outlasted Vurax. That is not an accident. Human. That is rare." Theo scratched his neck awkwardly. "Doesn't mean I want to be part of your royal soap opera." Another council member smiled faintly. "Too late. The galaxy knows. Calyx has accepted you. And the union of 9 systems is watching." Zaraka added, "There are now rumors that the Calixian High Matriarchate is embracing human alliances. You're not just bonded to me. You're becoming a symbol of cross-species integration." Theo paled. "Oh, no. No. I'm not a politician. I don't do speeches or diplomacy. I hyperventilate when I use alien restrooms." The council leader spoke again. "Then you will learn, or perish." Theo flinched. "Great. Love that gentle encouragement." Suddenly, a chime rang through the hall. A communicator flashed on the wall. A projection flickered to life. A face, stern and cold, from the Zelkor Dominion, a rival species known for their purity obsessions and brutal enforcers. "The Calixian bonded human," the figure said. "Unacceptable. Weak. Impure. This insult to tradition will not stand." The council stood in unison, but Theo just groaned. "Here we go." Zaraka's hand dropped her weapon. "The Dominion sees your existence as a threat. If you remain bonded to me, Theo, they'll try to eliminate you." He turned toward her, eyes wide. "Because of this?" He gestured vaguely at her chest. Her cheeks flushed violet. "Because of us." The screen blinked off. The council said nothing. Zaraka whispered, "I can end this now. Tell them the bond was a mistake. A fluke." Theo stared at her, at the warrior who'd gone from stoic to blush-prone disaster, because of him, at the alien woman who defended him, fought beside him, and now stood ready to unmake everything for his safety. His heart beat louder than the noise in the room. "No," he said softly. "Let them come." She blinked. He squared his shoulders, still bruised, still exhausted, still probably bleeding internally, and said, "We started this with an accident. Might as well finish it with a revolution." And for the first time, Zaraka smiled. Fully. "Stupid human," she muttered. "You're starting to sound like a warrior." It didn't take long for the news to spread. By the next sunrise on Calyx Prime, 1,000 star systems were buzzing with one name, Theo Marsh. Human, scientist, accidental enhancer of alien body parts, now bonded to one of the most elite warriors in Calyxian history, and standing at the center of a political firestorm. Theo had barely gotten used to the silk-lined robes they forced him into when the first Dominion ship arrived in orbit, not just a scout vessel. A Dread-class warcruiser. Zaraka stood with him on the high balcony of the Capitol Tower, staring up at the red glowing sky. Her armor gleamed, her expression stone cold, but her fingers twitched near her weapon. Theo leaned on the railing, sipping something that tasted like spicy motor oil and caffeine. Tell me that's just a diplomatic visit. It's not. I was afraid you'd say that. Behind them, Calyxian guards scrambled into battle formation. Emergency defense systems flared to life. The city shifted, walkways sliding into place, domes locking, plasma shield humming. Calyx Prime was used to war. Theo, on the other hand, was used to spreadsheets and whiteboards. Why me, he muttered. Why are they so obsessed with this? Zaraka didn't look at him when she answered. Because humans weren't supposed to matter. You were observers. Background noise. Funny, loud little creatures playing with fire. That's honestly pretty accurate. But now, she continued, you've bonded with me. You've survived our trials. You made me blush in public. And now half the galaxy is wondering if humans are more than they seem. Theo swallowed. And the Dominion? They hate the idea of unpredictability. You are unpredictable. A low hum rattled the balcony. A Dominion shuttle descended, sleek and black, covered in ancient runes and bristling with weapons. Zaraka stepped forward. Stay behind me. No argument there. The shuttle touched down. The ramp opened, and out stepped a figure in obsidian robes. Slender, sharp-eyed, Dominion elite. Her name was Lady Zyrith, a High Inquisitor, and possibly the most feared diplomat alive. She stopped 10 feet from them. You are Theo Marsh? Theo hesitated. That depends. Are you here to kill me? Her lip curled. You are impure. This bond, this farce, it threatens centuries of order. Zaraka moved between them. It's our bond, our tradition. Stay out of it. Lady Zyrith raised a thin brow. You defile Calyxian honor for this fragile, mouthy creature? Yeah, Theo said, stepping forward despite the sweat pouring down his back. She did, and maybe she regrets it. But I don't. Silence. Then he added, Look, I didn't mean to get involved. I didn't even mean to, you know. He gestured vaguely at Zaraka's chest. But I did, and now I'm standing here, sore in places I know I had, facing down a death cult space nun, because I fell backwards into intergalactic politics. Lady Zyrith stared. And if that makes me a threat? Theo said, Good. Zaraka glanced at him, surprised. You fear humans because we adapt. We trip into things and make history by accident. And you think because we're soft, we're weak. But I've been insulted, electrocuted, hunted, and humiliated, and I'm still here. Still standing. Still bonded. His voice was shaking, but he kept going. You want purity? Fine. Go polish your ancient rules. But we're building something new. One accidental boob serum at a time. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then Lady Zyrith spoke. So be it. The Dominion will issue a challenge. A final trial. Zaraka's eyes narrowed. You can't. He already passed 3. This is not a Calyxian trial. It is ours. A test of influence, not flesh. Theo frowned. Wait. Influence? You and your mate will face the Council of Unity. You will convince them your bond is not a danger. If you fail, the galaxy votes to dissolve Calyxian autonomy, and Earth's entry into the Union will be revoked. Zaraka stepped forward, fists clenched. You want to tear apart a planet because I bonded with a human? Lady Zyrith's voice was cold. Because he represents what we fear most, change. The shuttle lifted off a moment later, leaving silence in its wake. Theo turned to Zaraka. So no pressure, huh? She looked at him, jaw tight. We have 3 days. Okay, we can prep, plan our argument, practice speeches. You, she said dryly, have to convince an intergalactic council that you're not a cosmic mistake. Theo blinked. Cool, cool, cool. I've been doing that my whole life. 3 days. That's all they had. Just 72 hours to convince the Council of Unity, the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy, that their wildly accidental, totally unplanned, biologically enhanced bond wasn't a galactic disaster waiting to implode. Theo sat cross-legged in the suite's war room, surrounded by holographic files, alien law books, and a bowl of glowing fruit blobs he couldn't identify and refused to taste. He hadn't slept. His hair was a mess. His eyes were red. And he was stress-eating dried space meat that tasted like peppery tire rubber. Across from him, Zaraka sat perfectly composed, as usual, in full ceremonial armor, her skin polished and her posture regal. But there was something different about her now, something softer around the edges. You need to stop spiraling, she said calmly. Your anxiety has its own gravitational pull. I'm fine, Theo lied. I'm just calmly preparing to get judged by a galactic panel who could dissolve my species' entire diplomatic future because I accidentally enhanced your boobs. Zaraka gave him a slow blink. Maybe don't lead with that at the hearing. He groaned, clutching his forehead. I don't belong in this. I'm not a politician. I'm not even cool. I had one accidental moment of brilliance, and now I'm a space husband to a 7-foot murder goddess with fans, enemies, and a civil war on speed dial. Zaraka leaned forward. You think I belong in this? Theo looked up. She didn't look angry. She looked vulnerable. I was a soldier, she said. I trained to lead squadrons, not charm politicians. My job was to protect my people, not parade around in ceremonial bindings while being judged for this. She glanced down at her enhanced chest, which was still causing minor political riots on Calixian social feeds. Theo bit back a laugh. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mess up your life. You didn't mess it up, she said softly. You just changed direction. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Zaraka exhaled and said, Let's go over the plan again. Theo nodded, flipping through his notes. Okay, first, we establish precedent. Calixian law allows for interspecies bonds if both parties pass the trials, which we did, even if one of us did it while flailing like a drunken raccoon. Zaraka cracked the barest smile. Then, he continued, we appeal to the Union's future, show that this bond symbolizes unity, not danger. And finally, we make it personal, that despite species customs or the awkward origins of our relationship, it's real. Zaraka tilted her head. Is it? Theo froze. What? She was watching him carefully now. Is it real? To you? He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. I don't know. Her face remained unreadable, but something in her eyes flickered. I didn't plan any of this, he said. You're terrifying. You roll your eyes when I talk. You fight like a demigod, and half the time, I don't know if you're going to kiss me or crush my rib cage. Zaraka said nothing. But when I stood in that arena and I saw you watching, I wanted to survive, not just to win the trial. I wanted to be worthy of you. Her expression didn't change, but her hands slowly unclenched. The bond might have started by accident, he said quietly. But what it's turning into, that's on purpose. Before she could answer, the door chimed. A council emissary stood outside, draped in gold and silver sashes. Your audience begins in 1 hour. Transport awaits. Theo stood slowly. His knees cracked. His anxiety flared. Zaraka adjusted his collar. Straighten your spine. You're representing Earth. I'm representing poor decision-making and accidental hormones. You're representing me. Theo paused. Then he nodded. The council chamber was vast, a floating arena suspended in space, with windows that open onto starfields and nebulae. Each delegate hovered in a circular platform. Zelethi, Vakar, Shimmerkin, the Vanari, and more. Earth's platform, newly added, was barely a blip among the giants. As Theo and Zaraka stepped into the center, Lady Zyartha's voice rang out cold and sharp. The floor recognizes the accused. Theo cleared his throat. His mouth was dry. His palms were wet. And every instinct in him screamed run. But he didn't. He stepped forward. My name is Theo Marsh. Human. Biochemist. And apparently, the biggest mistake in galactic protocol since the Volok tried to marry a space station. A few delegates chuckled. I didn't intend to start a diplomatic crisis, he continued. I was just showing off a compound. I didn't know it would affect Calixian physiology that way. I didn't know it would make a warrior blush. Zaraka exhaled sharply beside him. What happened after, it wasn't about politics. It wasn't strategy. It was two people from two species finding something unexpected. He turned to face the council. I survived your trials. Not because I'm powerful, but because I cared. I refuse to let go. And if you think that's dangerous, if you think love, even awkward, unexpected, inconvenient love, is a threat, he looked straight at Lady Zyrith. Then maybe the problem isn't us. It's you. The chamber fell silent. Then Zaraka stepped forward, voice strong and clear. He is mine, and I am his, not by fate, by choice. And I dare any of you to challenge that. The chamber buzzed with whispers. Lady Zyrith's expression barely twitched. The council will deliberate, she said, and the lights dimmed. The chamber lights stayed dim for what felt like a lifetime. Theo stood in the center of the floating arena, heart pounding so loudly he swore it echoed off the dome's curved ceiling. Zaraka stood beside him, arms folded, face impassive, but he'd spent enough time around her to see the tension in her jaw, the subtle twitch in her fingers. Even she didn't know what was about to happen. Above them, the delegates' platforms floated in slow rotation, each species cloaked in their ceremonial garb. Some whispered, some observed in silence. A few, especially from the Dominion, glared like they were already imagining Theo disintegrated molecule by molecule. Finally, the lead delegate of the council, a transparent, multi-eyed being known as Vos Ellerith, glided forward in its pod, speaking in a voice that felt like it existed inside Theo's own skull. The council has heard your words. It has seen your trials, and it has weighed the consequences of your bond. Theo swallowed. This was it. The Dominion has requested the bond be dissolved and the human removed from all diplomatic protection. Of course they had. Vos Ellerith turned slowly, glowing eyes scanning the assembly. But the council does not make decisions based on fear. A ripple of murmurs, some in approval, others not. We have reviewed the human's actions, his survival through Calixian tradition, his defiance of our expectations, and his capacity for loyalty, adaptation, and resilience. Theo blinked. His breath held so tight he felt lightheaded. In recognition of these traits, so often dismissing humans, we acknowledge that this bond, while unorthodox, represents a truth the galaxy must face. Vos paused, letting the silence stretch like a drawn weapon. Change is here, and it blushes. Several delegates chuckled. Even Zaraka cracked a smile, just barely. The council votes in favor of the bond. Calyx retains sovereignty. Earth retains its seat. The Union stands. Theo nearly collapsed on the spot. The chamber erupted, not into applause, but into a low wave of reactions. Some groaning, others nodding, a few angry Dominion voices sparking threats of protest. But the vote was done. The bond stood. Lady Zyrith narrowed her eyes across the chamber. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her glare locked onto Theo like a promise of future retribution. Let her try, he thought. He'd already fought a tusk beast, faced his childhood trauma, and survived near-lethal flirting with an alien woman who could bench-press a hover tank. He could handle whatever came next. As the council slowly emptied, Zaraka stepped closer to him. You realize, she said, voice low, you're now officially one of the most talked-about beings in the galaxy. Great, Theo muttered. I just wanted to teach people about hormone receptors. Now I'm space famous for giving you weaponized, coconuts. Zaraka gave him a look. You keep calling them that, I will crush your rib cage. Theo grinned. Totally worth it. She rolled her eyes but didn't move away. You didn't just survive, you fought back. Stumbled, choked, babbled, sure, but you fought. That's more than most warriors do. I fought because I had to, he said. But I stayed because... She arched an eyebrow. Because what? He hesitated, then stepped closer, just a little. Because I wanted to see if you'd ever blush again. And just like that, like someone flipped a switch, Zaraka's cheeks went violet. She shoved him, gently. Stupid human. Blushing alien. They stood there in the middle of the now-empty chamber, two people from opposite ends of the universe, bound by mistake, and maybe something more than either of them wanted to admit just yet. Theo reached out and took her hand. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. Instead, she whispered, "Let's go home." He tilted his head. "You mean your planet?" "No," she said, smirking faintly. "Ours." And with that, they walked out, hand in hand, scandal and all, into the stars.